Okay, so I'm trying to go live and I'm trying to figure out the technology and basically how it works. I am 0 for 1 so far in trying to solidify something. And basically, the point of this is I'm trying to open up my topics and discussion for greater to greater lucidity, criticism, and feedback, so that just individuals while they're watching what I'm saying can be more engaged. I'm sure that there are questions and things that people don't take the time to write, or really places that people are lost in things because I do use so much technical language. I also just want to try a different vehicle, try something new, try something different because I'm an extroverted intuitive type in terms of my auxiliary function. And so I think like the thing I want to present here is just to say that this will be something that's happening, and it's something I'm looking forward to very much so because I think it gives new possibilities for the future in terms of people being able to realize and understand and try and grapple with the very powerful existential items and philosophical inquiries that I'm trying to bring to people. And I think it'll be an opportunity for people to get things down into a way that they can really conceive and understand them without me having to try and bastardize the whole process and things. Um, where I left off in the failed stream prior was just that my whole bent is this, that if I were somebody teaching a writing course or I was an English teacher, the thing I would be using the English, the writing, and the literature, the very items of study and discipline for, would be to teach the individual how to reason with language. It's not merely the acquisition of language. It's not merely my usage of language and grammar and different items and things that should be the concern of anything that's necessarily going on in the videos, but what one can learn in terms of being able to use words to reason and represent reality with. It's an individual who's able to articulate what reality is and represent it that has the greatest promise in terms of being somebody who is useful and capable of overcoming, useful to society and capable of overcoming missteps and short-sightedness within reason, because language is our evolutionary inheritance, and it underpins so much of what mankind does. It's why I have such a strong attention to it, though I'm very much of a pragmatist when it comes to language, and I'm not somebody who's trying to be eloquent, though that may be something of a, I would guess, manifestation of just the tendency for myself to be very scrutinizing with language. But the point isn't language. The point is reasoning. The point is reasoning with language. Just like with typology, the point I want for people to have is to be able to reason about what it means to have a personality, what it means for temperament, what it means to be able to theorize and to think about what's going on with an individual given the whole itemizations of existence and how the individual constructs themselves up. Just what is everything that's important to personality? And that's what I want to capture in the typology. How can I reason about what a cognition is, what a function is, the relevant literature and and the scientific journals and whatever can be grabbed on by people just in the lay space in terms of their searching on Google or Google Scholar and different things, what one can make about just what somebody's postulating in another video when somebody's saying about the existence of an INFP, an INFJ, an ENFP, or whatever, what have you. What should I expect from myself and how I act in the world? What can I reason is an acceptable expectation on ethical and moral judgments about how I present something? Is in just reasoning about philosophical ideas in general. You know, is relativism something truly instantiated out in the world? Is objectivity something truly instantiated out in the world? Can we come to any finitude about these things? No, not necessarily. But should we not look and should we not continue to reason and try and work something out? That's what I want all of this to stand for. Let's get out there and reason. And let's build the capacities for reasoning on a whole host and number of items and topics that are, I think, salient. Just salient because currently, right now in the West, there's so much of a revision and a hearkening back to ideas. We either want to revise something as it stands, as we find so many things insufficient, or we want to go back. And you look at political movements, particularly with the last elections, and just statistically, the Donald Trump supporters were elderly Caucasian males. And the values that they hold are the very presuppositions that led them to act and make their decisions in the world. And this is a trend. It's these values and these presuppositions are instantiated in the Judeo-Christian mandates and the old Puritan and even Western pragmatist thought that existed, in the 50s and the 60s, and even different items of elitism. And it's where you get the fascist and the supposed neo-Nazi appreciation of an individual like Trump and what he's saying. But the reason I bring that up is because we're in a time period where very few things are settled. Very few things are settled. Very few things are settled in terms of typology. Very few things are settled in terms of philosophy. Very few things are settled in terms of science. It's all under revision, or it's all under a process of returning to or going back. And so we need to figure out a way to just orientate ourselves in this landscape because it's shifting. And the reason that shifting landscape is important to pay attention to is just for the mere fact that those are the very landscapes that nihilism and totalitarianism can erect themselves to be the final determining forces of the motion and progress of a community, a nation, a group, or a people. And certainly we don't want to repeat the horrors of the 20th century. And certainly we don't want to go back to things that we've already fought so hard to overcome. And certainly we want to move forward in such a manner that we don't find ourselves in the same positions that we find ourselves now in terms of the important scientific questions that cannot be answered merely from the fact, I have a question. Okay. I'll answer that. But merely from the fact that we have misplaced our philosophical underpinnings of what we think can be perceived in the world. And what I mean is that, there is no such thing as a philosophy-free science. It's just that philosophy gets embedded in, it mostly gets smuggled in, and nobody checks it. And it's and so that's leading to a lot of problems in what we can't reconcile with one theoretical system with another, whether that be physics or even the problems in cognitive science or neuroscience in terms of the neuronal doctrine that existed as the forbearing theory that prevented us from understanding things about glial cells and many other capacities and the overarching capacity, the overarching makeup of the arching makeup of the brain and what we're missing. And so let's stop missing things. And empiricism certainly is necessary, but it's the facts don't have anything to bring to the table or to bear on anything if we cannot reason. And so it's reasoning, and reasoning alone, dare I say, though I may like strike some people straight, no, I won't, really wouldn't, because I'm an INTP. So I'm a dominant introverted thinker. And so I would say it's pure reasoning alone that gets us anywhere. Or at least at this point in time in history, we need to revise reasoning. And so to answer that question, I'm streaming from Southern California. I live in Southern California. I'm in this state where it seems like all the funny and the messy business collects. I'm in the San Diego area, and so that's where I'm streaming from. And I go to school here in Southern California, and I'm a mathematics and physics major, and so it's that's my business for being on here, and that's what I'm trying to open up to people, and that's what I'm trying to bring to the world. And I know that there is just a whole plethora and mess of topics that I bring into the world. Oh, what's the L in Joshua L? The L is my last name, which is Love. My whole name is Joshua Love, and so that's the L in Joshua L. I mean, I don't think you're gonna be able to find anything on me just from having that, but that's what the L is for. But like the whole bit and thing I'm trying to bring to the world is just trying to honestly shake people and revivify meaning. And I'm trying to get away from this kind of postmodern. I'm trying to get away from postmodernism and the linear constructivist and certain ideological frameworks of the Enlightenment. Now I understand the Enlightenment was a period of the championing of reasoning, but I think somewhat of a bastardization seeped into things in terms of we mostly value reason. What's the place? Okay, I got another question. What's the place of axioms in a rational model? Isn't irrational? That was a large one. Hold on. What's the place of axioms in a rational model? Isn't it irrational to abide by a foundation which we hold to be self-evidently true? In which case, doesn't this mean that pure rational is impossible? That is a great question. Okay, so the place of axioms is simply this, that okay, so the place of axioms is this, that there are certain things that that cannot be ruled out. It's not that that they're necessarily true. And so that's something that's misleading about axioms. It's not, we say self-evidently true, but probably what we should say, this cannot be ruled out. This cannot be ruled out, so let's hold it in suspension so that we can go ahead and construct a framework of understanding about this thing. Can pure rationality really be the thing? No, but can you get good facts if you're not using reasoning? And that's the thing I'm trying to bring to bear. Do you know how to best aggregate a collection of facts in terms of the empirical landscape in such a way that we can come up with the best theoretical models if you're not reasoning in such a way that the organization of the scheme is so general that further predictive capacities and coherency with other systems can be a thing. What I mean is that no, you can't be certain that anything's self-evident. You can't be certain that anything's self-evident. But if you want to start answering a question, you have to pick a place to start. You really have to pick a place to start, because what can be, if you're talking about existence, well, can you really know you exist? No, hell no. You can't actually know if you exist. But if you want to start asking questions about existence, you have to, at the very least, assume that there's some way that you do exist. Because we can't honestly get the thing off the ground if we don't make this assumption about that this thing, at the very least, can't be ruled out. This thing, at the very least, can't be ruled out, or it would completely collapse the ground of discussion, which could be fruitful in trying to determine and understand what we can know about something. And certainly, empiricism has to inform rationality. It's not, to me, this, this simple dichotomy between rationality and empiricism. The two definitely have their intermingling, and deduction has to be informed by empiricism. The two don't get away from one another, but I think we're just at a time and age where we've gone so heavily towards theoretical and away from strict lines of deductive capacities that we're finding ourselves lost. And I mean, and a good example is just in physics, in terms of being able to rectify classical mechanics with relativity and quantum mechanics, because there's things that are fundamentally wrong with them at the bedrock of the axioms that bring them together. And the Dirac's equation, Yang-Mills equation, and Einstein's field equations are probably some of the best. They are the best in the wave equation. Though there's problems with Schrodinger's wave equation, those are the best damn equations we've got in theoretical physics. But even with Einstein's equation, there may be something fundamentally wrong with it in terms of him trying to slip in certain things at the foundational level that you really couldn't make if you don't have a certain philosophical view to you. If you're not looking at the world in a certain way, you can't come to these conclusions. And it's where you get the emergence of things like particle physics and classical wave mechanics, or classical field theory. Because is the world a collection of particles, or is it a collection of waves? And then quantum mechanics says that they're the same thing, that they have this duality, but even that has to be revised. But we get all these different ways of viewing the world that can't be just unified with one another, because we're not treating philosophical manners, or the pure, what I just consider the aspects of pure reasoning, to their greatest extent. I mean, the point of science isn't philosophy, but you don't really ever get away from just having some way you view and reason about the world. And I think that we have to continue to try and revise just the way we're reasoning about the world and the way that we're reasoning about empirical methods. The two can't be masters of one another. Empiricism can't be the master of deduction or just reason, and reason can't be the master of empiricism. It's the fact that the two things have to keep one another in check. That they're all part of this thing about the search and creation of knowledge and the best approximation to truth that we can come to, but we just have to handle them in the sort of right appropriation. And I think just right now in our time with the advent of scientism and just the complete rampant, I guess, dispersion of postmodernism, also materialism, and rational a materialism that, we get away from it. And I think that that would be just a place to start. And I'm not a guy with all the answers, and I don't think I'm a guy with all the answers. I'm just trying to get, you know, let's get the ball rolling because we're stuck. We're really stuck in a lot of ways. We're stuck on the moral frontier. We're stuck on the ethical frontier. We're stuck on in physics. Well, mathematics is humming along kind of slowly but nicely still. I mean, it's not meeting a lot of its problems. Literature. I mean, man, we haven't. I don't know. Well, I mean, like, I'm not somebody who's, yeah, I'm into classical literature. So possibly what's come out in these last few years have been things that are seminal to just what it means to be human. But I mean, I haven't seen much amazing existential or humanistic writing coming out. And I'm not saying that one has to be an existentialist or one has to be a humanist to have any kind of real value to their thoughts in the world, because a lot of it's necessary because we have to bounce things off and sort of contend with one another to really get at something. It's not till you're being skeptical and arguing with somebody that you really think about something to a certain extent. But really, there's not as much motion when there's so much more knowledge in the world and there's so much more technology. There's a greater capacity for us to be able to present our ideas and really communicate and collaborate with one another, yet we're just barely making it in some regards. And I know there's advances, like very real rapid advances in other domains, such as the evolution of technology. We're moving frighteningly fast in that area. However, we're not moving fast enough to inquire things about the empirical world, and that's moving faster than our ability to really reason morally and ethically, which is a problem. So many things I think are in flux and imbalance with one another in this shifting landscape because we're just deficient in reasoning. Because I think if somebody is truly reasoning, well, I said pure reasoning, I think like, okay, of course we all are just learning. I thought you might enjoy this question. Intent was to bring out intent was to bring out the NE, enjoying your unraveling answers. Thanks, Josh. Well, you're welcome. I mean, I do like to do that associative thing because it is all really connected in this very interesting way that the item of reasoning is just something that's at the, to me, underpinning of the pursuit of knowledge. And that's all that we're after. That's all that I'm after, I suppose, or that's all I'm trying to present. In the greatest, no, I don't know if I can say the greatest sense, but in just this way that if we do not have people that can invent, I suppose, because maybe you should ask, what is pure reasoning? And in one way, to me, it's just a game. Because, it's a game like this. It's very analogous to the question of, is math in reality or is it just in people's heads? And it really is, it depends on what you mean. And I think it's a bit of both, because if people are the products of evolutionary history and it's the environment itself that has made our brains and has greatly influenced our capacity to reason, then it would be appropriate to believe that there's something about the interaction of the environment on us that makes the very foundations and grounding of how we think about the world. Though there's something deeply subjective and personal about it because we are emotive, irrational beings, there are going to be these things that are fuzzily instantiated in it that have nothing to do with the objective world. It's to say that mathematics is this marrying between the objective reality, because numbers, objects, and certain realities like that, though they be abstract, are out in the world. They're the marrying of the world and us, and our quirky little strange place in it. Mathematics and like knowledge itself. I think knowledge is something that we create. It's man, it's anthropomorphically generated. Knowledge isn't something that's really out in the world insofar as like, we know that the flower is purple, because to the bee the flower may not be purple, because there's a whole hue and array of electromagnetic spectrums that are going on to the bee that we can't really see, and so we can't really appreciate and capture that in terms of our being able to just construct a model of what is a flower in the greatest empirical way, in the most accurate descriptive way. So we can't really do that. But what we can do is play this game about how do we best go about making these things that we can use to really understand the world, and for the more pragmatic individuals to get a foothold on it, or to kind of rationally dominate it, which we tend to like to do. And so reason just helps in this game, because how do you want to start the thing? Because it's a lot like Monopoly or Scrabble or anything like that. You're going to put it together and it's going to have all of its consequences, and it's just going to unfold in this really interesting manner. But, given that we are things that are imaginative and we have the capacity for language, we're embedded in this really abstract thing of culture, which is a rather robust dominance hierarchy, and this thing is going to take shape and form and move and affect us by way of how we best create this game of knowledge, how we best play it, how it really folds out, how it really unfolds. And that's why I think that INTPs or ENTPs or even the introverted thinkers the introverted thinkers in period are just so concerned in the ascertaining of knowledge, and why we just want to stick to reason in some respects, because it's the generator. It really is the generator of knowledge. We make knowledge, or knowledge structures, epistemological structures. Just we do it, and we're in that business. I just think we're in the business right now in the 21st century and the oncoming 22nd century of trying to make new epistemological structures that act as arcs in a way, like Noah's Ark, to the salvation of mankind, because we just have all these potential crises that could really stand to sink the ship of the fraternity of mankind if we're not careful. And, it's not like it's this giant doomsday picture, because violence has gone down historically. Abject poverty has gone down historically in the world, and certain things of irreducible differences in people and even our circles of empathy have expanded over time. But the stakes are just higher, because there's just such a great degree of technological omnipotence that we wield, and things can move so fast that that kid gets the first line in The Genetic Legacy. I mean, I don't know, okay, thank you. I guess, yeah, it's a compliment. Thank you. Just that we need to do things, and I mean, I've never seen that, reasoning can certainly mislead you. And so that's just the reason I'm doing all of this. And I'm grateful for people participating and really trying to get something out of the content. If anybody wants anything, so that's just the overall kind of deal, I suppose. If anybody wants anything about typology, because I think that this is the place where people get lost in some regards, because I do think of things a little differently, ask questions, because, man, I want to answer things about typology and personality, because it's just really funny and interesting to me. Also, if anybody wants sources, because a lot of times I'm not able to just go through and I have my laptop, well, not a laptop, a tablet over here to the side of me. I'm not always able to just go to all the readings that I've done while I'm making a video and things. So, just throw a question out there in terms of personality and topology, and I'll get something moving in that direction. But one thing I would like to say is that the reason I try to revise things when it comes to typology is this. I don't think that MBTI is necessarily sufficient in answering all of the questions. Might be a stupid question, but do you think what do you think is a nature of an axiom? Can an action potential, for example, be considered an axiom? That's not a stupid question at all, because it's like, sorry. No, cancel, stop. No, that's not a stupid question at all, because, you might want to that's a good question about where does one get an axiom from, because it has a lot to connect with what I was saying before. Yeah, INFP imagination, I appreciate it. Because it has a lot to do with what I was saying before about what do you think about math, what can one really think about mathematics being something out in the world or being in the head of people? Because how is it that we know something? And Jean Piaget was really good at capturing this in children in terms of how they really learn. So we start acting things out first. And our actions are things that come down to just the base anthropomorphic structures. And what I mean are the drives. People have drives that make them up. We're just a collection of these hosts of drives. And they have their messengers, which are the emotions and the pre-ready-made reflexes that are inherent in our body. We honestly are wearing knowledge, or we act out knowledge. Like, you map knowledge onto yourself, because you can act out what you can't articulate. You can typically act before you can articulate something. When we're talking about knowledge, we're talking about something in an articulated sense, something that can be delineated. But the true axiom lies in the fact that we have to assume that this is a reality, because it's a part of the base structure of how we just have to be, how we're determined to see the world. There's only I really think that there's only a certain number of axioms we can really come to as people, because it depends on what you're asking the question of. It depends on what you're trying to play, what kind of game you're trying to play. What game is it that you're playing? Are you trying to play one with mathematics? Are you trying to play one with morality? Are you trying to play one with ethics? What game are you really trying to play? Because you could look at knowledge as I would say a collection of tools to climb up a dominance hierarchy, or a collection of tools to navigate oneself through reality. And you got to ask what's real. And unfortunately, when you ask what's real, it's like it depends, because if you're talking about the objective world, that's one kind of real. If you're talking about your own subjective phenomenological landscape, that's one kind of real. If you're talking about interactions with other people and dominance hierarchies, that's another kind of real. And that's why Freud had the superego, the id, and the ego. And, we're just this little complex of things. But our knowledge stems from the complex that we are. We only get what we know because we're human beings. And so the thing with axioms is, yes, an axiom it probably is an action. And I would think, so one thing I was thinking of a while back was this, that when we start talking about abstraction, just where the hell did the thing come from? And like nobody can get to this. And I can't really get to it, but I thought this, if you have people, and we do this thing about observing things over time, that's something that people really do. We like to look at something for a while to come to a real conclusion about it, or just at the very least this. We think in a sort of haphazard empirical way, which is really natural to people, that if we see X happen over a number of sequences, and Y seems to be the cause for it, then X causes Y. And we can just do this thing of observation over time to get to conclusions about the world. And so say for just a simple thought hypothesis that you have two brothers in the Pleistocene era of human existence. So we're out in the good savannas of Africa, and we're not well integrated socially, but we'll travel in small communities, and women tend to congregate in groups, but males only congregate in groups of relatives and things, and ones that they're really familiar with. Let's say that that's the thing that's going on. So you got these two brothers. One brother's wherever, and they're like, hey, we want to go get some water. And so they're looking for some water, and they stumble upon a stream. And, well, one of the brothers stumbles upon the stream. And he stumbles upon the stream to fetch some water, but what he notices is that there's a harem of women bathing in the stream. And he says, hot damn, there's a harem of women bathing in this stream. I want to remember this. And so there you go. That's like, drives definitely do instantiate things in people. And you'll see as I go on with this where axioms are coming from. Like, hot damn, I want to remember this place. So he looks around for any demarcating kind of item in it. Every damn stone looks the same. I'm not really good at paying attention to the way the water flows. God knows, I don't know if they'll be here again, but they might. But one thing I do notice is that there is a red rock over there, and Lord knows there's like a million waterways around this area, but this one has the red rock. And then he runs to his brother and says, brother, guess what? I found women. He's like, really? Where were the women at? And he was like, in the stream. Well, what stream? That's not really helpful. Well, the red rock. The red rock? And then he's like, yeah, the red rock. It has a red rock in the stream, and that's where the women are. So the brothers over time just start visiting the stream where the red rock is, and sometimes they see women and sometimes they don't see women. But what they start associating is that if I want to find women, I go to the red rock. And so they get some women and they start having kids and things like that. And so the kids want to know, well, where did you meet mom? Or where is our history? Well, it began at the red rock. And they'll say, well, what is the red rock? And the red rock won't mean the stream anymore. It'll mean that specific thing, but then it'll start becoming something distant from the stream because they'll migrate. They'll migrate and they'll go some other place and they'll run into a crisis. We don't have enough women. Well, where should we go? We should find a red rock. It's like, well, there may not be any red rocks around, but what he means when he's saying we should find a red rock, we should find a place where women tend to congregate. Then as the thing gets delineated or extended further out into the future, red rock just becomes more and more and more and more abstract to where nowadays the red rock is the bar, but there is this notion because out of observation and action, real abstraction is born. It's like we play the game and then we can start articulating the rules to the game. And the only thing that we mean by genius a lot of times is just a person who can articulate the rules to a game. But this is how it pertains to axioms. Because say you want to know just something that has to be a foundational piece of a thing, because that's all you're asking with an axiom. What can we not exclude? Like there are some things that we can't exclude, or the whole conversation is just going to fall on this thing. Maybe you want to say, well, we want to have a conversation about a ball. And so what can the ball do? It bounces. One of the foundational axioms is just that balls are circular, they bounce, and they can be made out of a whole constituency of items, but they're made out of something. They are round, and they can bounce, and they can roll. their bounciness, just because a ball doesn't bounce very high, like you can't like slam a baseball on the ground and it bounces too high. Doesn't bounce too high, but it still bounces. Its bounciness is just zero. So if you start, that's how axioms start getting instantiated in something. You do start with something that's relatively embodied or action orientated, simple, really grounded in the observational or tactile senses of an individual. Then over time, that thing does get extended and they get revised. And you can even see something like this in Euclid's Elements in terms of the sum has to be the sum of the parts. The parts are not greater than the sum of the parts. The whole is greater than the parts that make it up. And that's something that you get from the whole idea of the Greek innovation of Archimedes and levers and pulleys and all sorts of human technology, because we've been making things for a long time, and you could really look at the articulation of those axioms as a summation of us making things for a very long time and realizing you put this thing together to get this thing and you get this little effect, and it tends to do this. These individual things by themselves could not produce this action, but these things collected together does produce this action, which makes us instantiate in an articulated sense that the parts are never greater than their sum. The parts are not greater than their sum. And so that's axioms, and that's how they work. It's not that they're perfect, and it's not that they won't need to be revised or anything like that. That's the point of empiricism in some respects, to keep it in check. But we also have to keep empiricism in check with reasoning. So that's a thing. Excuse me, I'm getting over a cold. And like with typology, man, I don't know any place to start. Like, because I see a whole number of ways this could go. Could anybody ask a question about typology? Anybody out there got a curiosity about typology? And I'm going to keep this going for probably another 20 minutes. I have a typology related question for you. Why do you think that Jung isn't an INTP? Seeing him type as ISTP, INTP, INTJ, INFJ. Okay, one of the reasons I don't think Jung is an INTP is because one thing I think with temperament is that it's biologically determined. I think that most people have their personalities when they're born, insofar as that, at least in prenatal research, we observe, I'll answer this one, I'll look at this a little later, but we observe that people their brains are basically tofu and putty, but then the tofu and putty, it's like a really general tofu and putty. Like you have the base circuits that you're going to use because you're a human being, but then like the little idiosyncratic slips, like he's a little more aggressive than the other person, she's a little more neurotic, or they're a little more exploratory, or they're a little more this, or they're a little more that, like the whole matrix of things coming together. That's mostly determined by neurochemical washings. And the neurochemical washings make so much of just the base package of temperament. Because personality is something like the mix between your temperament, your culture, and character. And that kind of makes up somebody. But I think like the base thing of somebody being an INTP, an INFJ, an ISTP, an INFJ has to do with temperamental factors, like they have a certain disposition towards the neurochemical dopamine, or they have a certain disposition towards the neurochemical of testosterone, or they have a certain neurological disposition towards estrogen, serotonin, vasopressin, or a whole number of host of items that do this funny coloration of the tendency for people to use certain circuits over others, and the overall neurophrenology. And neurophrenology is like the mapping of a person's brain. Like, do they have more prefrontal cortex, or do they have more lateral development? And some of those things come down to what one does with themselves. But the point is this: that personality, a large part of it, is deeply instantiated from biology. And scientists have done studies where they identify somebody as introverted or extroverted, and then they see how much they can make the introverted child be extroverted, or they can make the extroverted child be introverted. You can get an introvert to be social. You can't necessarily get them to like it. Insofar as that they don't get drained from the thing and they don't need time away from it. You can get an extrovert to spend time by themselves, but they would prefer not to spend time by themselves because they want to seek out dopamine, and they mostly get dopamine from being excited by the environment in some ways. And so when people are typing, when I'm typing somebody, what I first think is this: if they're making conclusions, because I don't think that the conclusions somebody can come to are very far from their base temperament. And one thing Jung said in his work about the collective unconscious and archetypes in volume 1 of the Red Book is that reason has its place, but reason is not the king, essentially. Reason is not the thing that makes us what we are. Man is not the reasoning and rational animal, and logic is cheap. And he saw logic as cheap. He saw it as necessary, but he said this when he was writing his work, that he dressed his work in the language of logic and reasoning so that it could be understood. But what he meant was that it could be understood a lot like God presents something to people in the Old Testament. Does God really have hands? No, because he doesn't have a body. I mean, like a spirit doesn't have a body. Does God really have a back? No, he doesn't. But does he need to say these things so people can understand him? And this is the thing too. People have to know what Jung was really up to. Jung was trying to reach into what he considered the, like, God. So, okay, well, I'll just say this. Jung had to dress his language in a certain way so that it could be received. So his use of reasoning and language were just for the fact of communicating his message, which to me is very indicative of an INFJ. It's not necessarily that they think that something is rational, not necessarily that they're out to be logical or they're out to be rational always, but they're trying to give the best presentation for something so that it is received. And Jung was certainly up to that, and he writes that that's what he was up to in volume 1 of the Red Book. Then you have to also understand what Jung was up to, because Nietzsche pronounced the death of God just a little before Jung's time. And so what Jung thought of the world was this, that religion was something of the human imagination being projected out into reality. So he believed people thought and conceived of the heavens because of just the billions of stars before there was all of this pollutants in the air. When you would go out into the night sky, you'd see the thing populated with billions of stars, and it was so numinous, like divinely awe-inspiring. And so people said, given the impersonal aspect of nature and all the chaos and different things and turns and twists of the universe and the cosmos and their insignificance towards it, that there was these gods out in the heavens that were determining things. Which makes sense, because rain comes from the sky, and I mean, that's not really like a dumb excuse me. That's not really a dumb proposition in a certain way, but that's what Jung thought. And more so, Jung thought that when people could not explain their possession by drives, insofar as now we understand things about the brain, insofar as that rage is its own place in the brain, panic is its own center in the brain, lust is its own center in the brain, play is its own center in the brain. exploration is its own center in the brain. Just that a person is a collection of these kind of little sub-personalities, and they really make up what the individual is motivated to do. And so sometimes you can be possessed by rage, and that's like being possessed by Ares, or that's like being possessed by a god. But when Nietzsche pronounced that God was dead, what Jung said, that the rationalization and materialization of the world killed the numinosity out in the world, but it never died. What happened was that it receded back into the conscious of mankind. And so what Jung was trying to do was get people to revivify the death of God in self. He wanted to take the base anthropomorphic structures of numinosity that was out in the world that got itself into humans and shake it up. He wanted to get it back out into the world. Like, Jung wanted to do something very dangerous. He wanted to bring the collective unconscious, like, for all that it is and all the unexpected uncertainty of it, back out into the lived reality so that people could get away from the problem of the tragedy of existence, essentially so that people could become actualized, and so that the world could be overarchingly, valuably justified. Because when God died, there was no overarching justification for existence. And so Jung was trying to put that back. I don't think that's anything that an INTP would be up to. I'm going to be honest. Like, I don't really think that that's something that an INTP would be up to. And Jung's reasoning for why he believed these things were heavily instantiated when you pressed him, were heavily instantiated in his experiences with his intuition, which tells me that he is definitely a dominant intuitive thinker. Because if you read his work, the dreams that he recants and the visions that he's stricken with, like stepping out of a fog when he's 8 and realizing that he sees his mother and his father as divine figures, but they've fallen from grace, and he sees them laying on the road as mere mortals, and now he knows not to take them too serious. Like, that's not something, I mean, I'm not saying that INTPs can't have those sort of experiences, but Jung's experiences that influence his work are on the frontier of religious. And I mean, certainly those things are possible, but I know something about introverted intuitive types, and it is that they're more prone to the activity of transient hypofrontality. And so to me, it makes more sense that that's what's going on in Jung, and he's simply presenting and sorting these things out with reasoning, but that introverted thinking and that tendency towards logic and pure reasoning are not, like, at all what Jung is up to. And I think that Jung gets mistyped and misclassified because of the new bent of scientism in this age, where we want to always instantiate a thinker as an NT or some ST. But to me, that's stupid. And so one thing I'll say here is too is Jung also had a very high IQ. Like, and that's one thing that annoys me. Just because somebody's highly intelligent does not mean they're an NT at all. I mean, that's honestly bad reasoning. And the mere fact that Jung is intelligent and sees a value in reasoning and presentation does not make him an INTP. And I just really, the reason I consider him an INFJ is just because I've read so much of his work and looked at his autobiography and things that I don't see an INTP. So that's that question. There's another one. Sort of weird question, but do you as an INTP think falling in love looks... whoa, that's different. Hold on. It's sort of a weird question. How do you as an INTP think falling in love looks like for you? How do you deal with the rise of romantic emotion towards a person? Woo! Alright, okay. Hitting me where I'm not necessarily, oh man, always comfortable. Alright. Oh, wow, love. So one thing about INTPs is Well, at least one thing about me is that I'm not rational necessarily when it comes to. Well, I can't be rational when it comes to love. It's not, honestly, it's not a rational thing. Insofar as this, and I mean this scientifically, that when we're looking at the. And I don't mean to like cheapen love or anything like that, but when we're looking at the phenomenon of romance in the brain, we're looking at certain centers and drives that are kind of coalescing together to give this emergent phenomena that we consider love. And there's real cognitive evidence of what's going on when the person's falling in love. But the part I really don't like, about love is the flight or the manic phase when you're really, really giddy about the person. I don't really like that because I don't like flying so close to the sun and away from reasoning. But because I'm a highly imaginative person, that happens so easily. I mean, it honestly can happen very, very easily with myself. And so I'm rather quick to be on top of myself and watching about how I feel about a person. Because what I think about a person is one thing. How I feel about a person is a whole nother manner. Because how I feel about somebody is just different. Because I don't necessarily feel things towards most people always. So if I feel something about somebody in the first place, it's rather peculiar to me. And I pay attention to it. I don't necessarily like feeling things about a person because I feel crippled in agency. I'd like to be objective. I'd like to do that imitation the most I can. But I know, like, there's no way in hell I can just be objective about women. Like, I really can't. I try, but I can't be. And I think love, in some ways, should be tried to be tempered with reason. Just the fact that, you can honestly fall in love with anybody you're attracted to. Not that you can fall in love with anybody, but you can fall in love with anybody that you're attracted to. And there's a whole host of reasons why any one person is attracted to another individual. There's potentially Freudian reasons why a person's attracted to another person. There's potentially biological reasons in terms of embodiment, the embodied characteristics of that person. There are emotional, political, valuative reasons that another person can fall in love with somebody. The only way you submit and consecrate the thing is with sex, because once it starts becoming something of a reward matrix between you and that individual, you're destined to go down a certain place where you're either going to fall in love with them or find yourself in a romantic tragedy. So just be careful. That's the only thing I can say. Just be careful. I think that nobody should try and be in a relationship with somebody that they can't communicate with and they can't negotiate with. You need to be able to talk to somebody because you need to negotiate with them, because you're never going to see eye to eye on things. You also shouldn't be in a relationship with somebody that you're not physically attracted to, because you're going to have sex with the person. Duh. Well, hopefully you do, because sex is a good furnish for the lasting of relationships, at least for a certain number of years. And you definitely want to make sure that you agree on enough things, value-wise and politically, that you're not just at one another's throat consistently, because you don't ever want to look at somebody that you're living with as your enemy, because we are just simple and we don't really do well with that. So, I don't know. That's kind of how I think about love and how I handle it and deal with it. I mean, I kind of, yeah, I mean, like, yeah, that's as far as I can get on love, that generally. I mean, I don't know if I can. You'd have to ask me something more specific for me to get any more in depth with it. Any more questions? Oh, you're welcome for the Red Rock analogy. Let's see. Any more questions? I'm gonna go for this. Whoa, this has been 60 minutes. So I'm gonna go for another 5 minutes and I'm out. sufficient answer. I got what I needed. Well, I'm glad. And I suppose in the next 5 minutes, what I can talk about is this. So, a video I'm thinking about coming out with. Well, no, I won't do that. You know, this has been an hour long. I just thank you for watching, people. I really appreciate the questions and being able to respond to you guys. And I'll be trying to do more of this during my winter break and even in the summertime. So, you know, write some questions down, if not now, that you may have for a future question and answer. And I'm going to make the ENFJ video in another 2 weeks, and I'm going to also make other videos in these next upcoming 2 weeks. So you may have questions about those things. So just save them. And I think that I should do if I try to make like this vacation video ideas. How much influence do neurobiological factors and personality have on physical appearance? Is there any possible connection? Oh, hell yeah, there's an absolute connection, because you can't honestly get sharp features without testosterone. Funny enough. So, yeah, hell yeah, there's a lot. But, yeah, I can definitely do more of those things. So, yeah, but get some questions down. I will definitely keep all these other questions and comments in mind on this video, and come with more content. But thank you for being with me and being a part of this. And I'll see you probably in another 2 weeks. Good night.